When you look at me, you probably have things that instantly come to your mind. Female, older, blonde hair, glasses, Caucasian. You might be wondering if I'm a grandmother yet. I am. And then there's the elephant in the room. But if you have manners, you probably would hold it back and saying it to my face. But you might be thinking, fat. Overweight, fat, obese, fluffy. In education, we're taught nuances of words and connotations. According to the Oxford Dictionary, the word connotation means an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal or primary meaning. For example, if I were to say the aroma of the cooking or the odor of the cooking, one invokes you to think the cooking smells good, and one invokes you to think that the cooking might smell bad. So, when you think about the connotation of the word fat, overweight, or obese, what comes to your mind? Who comes to your mind? Do you think of beauty when you think of that word? Do you think healthy, athletic, smart? Do you think, does she even realize how fat she is? She should really do something about that weight. Or do you think of me as my third grade student did about 10 years ago and think, she's fluffy? That was the very first time I ever heard someone use a positive connotation of my body size. And it made me start thinking. Now, this child was an artistic and energetic little girl. She loved to draw me pictures of dresses, and she had an amazing name. It was Arcavia. She would wrap her arms around my middle, as most children often do when you teach elementary school, and she would squeal as she hugged me, and she'd hug me as tight as she could, and she'd say, "Oh, Miss Halleck, I just love to hug you. You're so fluffy." I can still hear her saying it. Well, this brought the image to my mind of the fluffy unicorn in Despicable Me. But it also brought the image of someone who's loved, and part of the love was due to my body size, not in spite of my body size. When I was in third grade, I was a pretty happy child. I was well cared for, even though my family was not by any means wealthy. I was fed, I was safe, and I was loved. One day at PE, a girl in my class looked at me and went, "You're fat." I may have only been in the third grade, but I understood the connotation of her words. She said it as if I wasn't as good as the other kids or her because of my size. I can still see her face to this day. The problem was that in that one moment, I let all my self-esteem melt away with that one word, fat. Now, looking back at myself, I don't think that I was, but so what if I was? And the problem was, I believed her that it was bad, that I was different, and I let it take away a piece of my joy and replace it with an insecurity that I could never quite replace, or that I could never quite measure up because of my size. My size was bad enough that a girl who I barely knew needed to tell me. I walked through much of my life never feeling like I was as good as others in most social settings from then on. Even if I lost weight as I grew up, in my mind, I was still fat. My question is, why did the girl think it was okay to demean me because of my size? Did she learn that was okay from her family, from society, media, books she read? Books she read. On that note, today I want you to think with me about how fluffy kids are reflected in children's literature. So let's look in the window at my childhood literacy exposure. First of all, Peter Pan. Peter Pan comes from a classic play turned novel by James M. Barrie, first published in 1911. And if you've seen the Disney movie or the Mary Martin play or read one of the countless book versions of it, you know that there's a group of fun-loving lost boys. They're cute, and sometimes they're the defenders of Peter Pan and their clan of motherless children. Now notice, look at this image. Notice one more thing that maybe you didn't think about before. The one in the center of the image, now this image is from Disney's movie Peter Pan Return to Neverland. His name in this version is Cubby. Sometimes in other Peter Pan versions, he's Tubby Ted or Chubby. He's eating popcorn. No one else is. And has just caused a stir for the other kids right before this particular image, because they're having to make room for him to join on the log to eat his popcorn while none of the rest of them are eating. He also gets hit a lot in this film, and he seems to be the comic relief. So much can be said to children in one clip in a movie or one image of a book. The 1985 film The Goonies was written by Steven Spielberg, and later it was put out by Weekly Reader as a children's book. It's a cult classic about a group of self-proclaimed rejects. This children's adventure story presents a fun-loving character ridiculed for his size, nicknamed endearingly as Chunk. With the first lines of meeting his character in the book, he is described as clumsy, pudgy, and often makes up lies to get attention. The reader is introduced to him eating pizza and spilling his milkshake all over himself. So the intersectionality they give Chunk is not just that he's a liar for attention, but he's also clumsy and pudgy. The character of Chunk is constantly eating throughout the film and the book, or complaining if he can't eat, or dressed awkwardly and made out to be the klutz. He's even forced by another Goonie in the story to do a truffle shuffle dance before being allowed to enter his friend's home. At that point, what he has to do is reveal his pudgy tummy by lifting up his shirt and has to jiggle it while dancing. He's again the comic relief of the story. In Bartha Clement's 1982 story, Nothing's Fair in the Fifth Grade, I thought I had found a mirror to look into when I saw the cover. Her name was Elsie, and if you look the book up on Barnes & Noble's site, they describe it as a fifth grade class repelled by the overweight new student who has serious home problems and finally learns to accept her. They were repelled by the overweight new student. Allow me for a moment to read you one of the very beginning paragraphs where they're describing Elsie coming into the class for the first time. Elsie was gross. Her eyes were squished above her cheek, bubbles of fat. Her chins rippled down her neck. She really didn't have a waist except where her stomach bulged out below her chest. Her legs looked like two bed pillows with the ends stuffed in shoes. I know everyone hated having Elsie in our room. Imagine the sinking feeling after being deemed in third grade as fat. And then I'm reading a book like this where I think I'm finally going to see myself, and it's describing overweight people as ugly and kids looking in disgust, hoping she's not going to be in their class simply because of her size. They had to learn to accept her, that she was good enough to be a good friend, that there was more to her story than her size. In the 1974 release of Blubber by Judy Blume, the character of Linda is severely bullied, fat-shamed, if you will, with her class calling her Blubber after she does a report on whales. The book revolves around the bullying in the class due to her size. Even the bully gets bullied because of her lack of size on the reverse. The narrator, one of the bullies, then makes friends with someone else, and Linda ends up out alone after being accepted only long enough to gang up on one of the bullies. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was one of my favorite stories as a child. Let's look back at it, though, for a moment. It's by Roald Dahl. There's a character in there named Augustus Gloop. And this is how it reads about him to describe him in the book. Augustus Gloop was so enormously fat. He looked as though he had been blown up with a powerful pump. Great flabby folds of fat bulged out from his enormous body, and his face was like a monstrous ball of dough, and two small greedy currenty eyes peering out upon the world. As many of you know, he then falls into a pipe while the Oompa Loompas sing of his demise and the disgust of his size and greediness. Now, in the books and media that I've just shared with you, the children could instantly be summed up into one and only one piece of their story by the authors, the characters, and the directors for the films for them. Fat, gross, gluttonous, disgusting. Their intersectionalities were all disregarded without even saying hello to the character in some of these stories. In Blubber and in Nothing's Fair in the 5th grade, we saw how they were both horribly fat-shamed. They had to prove themselves worthy of being a friend in spite of their size. So why in the past have we only seen fluffy children as the sidekick or best friend, clumsy, gluttonous, or greedy, teased and bullied, storylines revolving around needs for weight loss, always eating, or comic reliefs? We can change this. Children need to see a positive reflection of themselves depicted in the books they read. They need to know they are so much more than their size. Fluffy kids have a story to tell. Children need to see books with characters that look like them regardless of their body shape, size, color, or gender. Sometimes the main character, sometimes the hero, and sometimes the star of the book. However, if all that is ever reflected to them is their images used as the brunt of the problems, the jokes, or the bullying, how can they see themselves as so much more? The way a child sees themselves depicted contributes to the societal norms that they conceive as truth based on the reflections they receive from literature and those around them. Michael Lowy, in his 1998 article titled Suggestions for Working with Fat Children in the Schools, presents that we are in need of a cultural shift. He states that since body image is an internalization of parental and peer criticism, parents have to take up the advocacy regarding acceptance of their children's obesity. He says that if we can shift societal thinking toward an acceptance of fat children by peers and adults, we can help children get rid of self-hatred. Friends, children aren't born with self-hatred. They learn it from societal prejudices, through family, through friends, media, and as we've seen here, through literature. Fluffy children need to receive the same allowances to be diverse, to be different, as well as they need to be able to take pride in their intersectionalities, to see them as more than a single story. Chimamanda Adichie teaches in her 2009 TED Talk that there's danger in the single story. We have to allow children to have more stories than a single story, to gain acceptance and shift prejudices, to see them as more than just their size and help them feel accepted and happy about their size. So now you might be wondering, well, are we changing in our society yet? It has been 40 years since I was called fat. So let me introduce you to some current literature that is starting that change. This first one is called The Truth About Grandparents. It's by Alina Ellis, and it gives us the window inside a little boy's experiences with his grandparents. He narrates what society has called truth about grandparents, and however, in each illustration, we see the imperfectly shaped and aged grandparents doing all the wonderful things that society has told the child that grandparents couldn't do or be. Regardless of their age and size, he's loved and he's happy with them. In this next one, called Alma by Juana Martinez Neal, we meet a little girl who's learning to love her very long name and her Latino heritage through her name. While she is shown with a round body, as in many of her family members, her body size is not addressed. She's simply the main character. She's learning an important regular lesson from her loving father. She learns about all the wonderfully diverse people in her family that her name comes from. In Beautifully Me by Nobella Noor, that story tells us about a little girl named Zubai from Bangladesh. She second guesses her beauty when her family complains about their sizes, and she had always thought of them as beautiful. So then she begins to question if she's beautiful if they aren't because of their size, and she starts to fear getting teased. Her family realizes their mistakes in presenting negative body images and help her see all the things that make her truly beautiful, most of all, being who she is. Chunky by Amina Layla is about an African-American little girl who shares several sides of her story, with only one of the pieces of herself being that she is chunky. She swims and jogs and plays and dances, and she dreams about all the things she might do when she grows up. And she loves her body and who she is. This one is one of my favorites. It's a wordless text. It's called FLORA and the Flamingo by Molly Idle, and it tells the whole story through just the illustrations about a little fluffy girl who's dancing with a flamingo. It's just fun and joyful. It draws in the reader. Her size has nothing to do with the story. It's just sheer child bliss, and there's a series of these FLORA in books with different birds. This next one is by Rebecca Alexander. She's the founder and CEO of a company called Algo. This company gears towards doing business accessibility for plus size people, and the book's called A Kid's Book About Body Image. It's all through the power of words, though, on these pages. There's no illustrations. It's nevertheless powerful. In Fry Bread, a Native American family story, this story portrays a Native American family teaching their friends and neighbors the heritage of their fry bread. The book shows people of different shapes and sizes and colors and genders, all just enjoying eating and being together. In Amanda's Big Dream by Judith Matz, Amanda's coach tells her that she thinks she would be a better skater if she would lose some weight. So Amanda has to think through this, and she decides she's proud of her body and her size, and she decides that the best way to achieve her goal is to practice and be proud of the results that practice brings. In Her Body Can by Katie Crenshaw and Addie Meshka, each page shows a positive light that all bodies are wonderful and can do a great many things no matter what their sizes are. This last one I'm going to show you now, I saved the best for last to me. I wish this was around when I was in third grade and that little girl said what she did to me. It's about a little girl named Frances. It's called Frances Discovers Possible by Ashley Latimer. And this is a story about, she once thought that the word fat was a warm and comforting word until she was told by her classmates that she was fat. And after hearing the connotation of their words, she feels ashamed and sad about herself. Her father sensitively gives her a safe place to think through her feelings, and she begins to think about the letter P that she had been assigned for her class to come up with words for, and the word possible as a letter P word, and realizing all the wonderful possibilities of things she can do, moving her to let go of her sadness for the teasing. This story shows wonderful support from families and how to go about talking together about these things. Now, I wish that I could tell you there are many more positive body image children's books out there 40 years later after I was called fat, but sadly I can't yet. There are some other titles, not many, that I was able to locate. Well, there were some in the middle school market and young adult market. We need diverse children's books for all ages and regularly, not just special ones, but books that are just regular books with body shapes, body sizes, so we can culturally shift. For children to embrace diversity and be proud of their differences. While there may not be that many yet, change has at least begun with these titles that I've shared with you today. I hope you'll join me in reading these books as I will to my grandbabies. Start the conversations with those in your life, the children in your life, parents, campuses, to have more children's literature where all body images are beautiful and normal. Arcavia graduated this year, and I got to see her again as she came back to walk the halls of our school and show students they could make it as she did with others that had done the same so proudly in their caps and gowns. It was such an emotional moment for me to see her there again as she stopped in line to hug me in that same way she did as a child. I was taken back to that moment when she first called me Fluffy, and I found out she loved that part of me that I once was ashamed for. Somehow, after I realized that the part of me I was shamed for could be loved and considered endearing by a child, and not in spite of it, a little of that shame began to melt away. And it made room for me to embrace that I am fat. But even better than that, I am fluffy. Thank you for listening.